What if I told you that the reason you haven't attracted the man you love isn't because you're not enough, but because you've been operating from the same emotional programs that keep replaying the same results? Imagine this. You're standing on the edge of a new reality, one where your energy, not your effort, pulls love toward you like a magnet. But here's the kicker: most people never get there, not because they can't, but because they don't believe it's possible. They wait, hope, chase, and repeat. Funny how we chase someone's attention more than we chase our own healing, right? But today that ends, because in the next few minutes, I'm going to take you on a journey from the fear of being unseen to the thrill of becoming magnetic, from craving love to attracting it without begging or bending. By the end, you'll understand that love doesn't start with someone else noticing you. It starts the moment you remember who you are. Ready? Good. Because what comes next might just change everything. Have you ever looked in the mirror and wondered if being yourself is really enough? Be honest. Not the social media version of you, not the filtered smile or the curated personality you put on around others, but the real, raw, unpolished you. The one with fears, quirks, bold dreams, and a soft heart that beats a little faster when love feels just out of reach. Let's start there, because that's where most people turn away. They think they need to become someone to be worthy of love. So they shrink, mold, perform, and somewhere in the process, they forget that the very thing that makes them magnetic is the one thing they're hiding: their authentic self. But here's the truth most won't say out loud: if you don't own who you are, how will anyone recognize your worth when you walk into the room? Now I know confidence can feel like a luxury. It's easy to say, be confident, when you're not battling inner doubts or years of conditioning that told you you're too much, too little, too loud, too soft. But confidence isn't a gift, it's a practice. It's waking up and choosing not to abandon yourself, even when you feel invisible. It's choosing to walk with your head held high, not because you think you're perfect, but because you finally stopped apologizing for not being. And that kind of confidence, it changes how you speak, how you move, how people feel around you. Think about it. Haven't you ever met someone who wasn't the most traditionally attractive, but there was just something about them? That's not luck. That's alignment. That's someone living in their truth without asking for permission. Let's pause here for a second. Quick question. When was the last time you laughed at your own weird laugh instead of trying to cover it up? Yeah, I see you. We all have those little things we edit in front of others, thinking they'll love us more if we fit their mold. But what if the very thing you're hiding is the thing that would have made them stay? Confidence isn't about adding layers. It's about shedding everything that isn't you. It's about knowing you can walk into any room and not shrink just because someone else doesn't see your shine. Because let's be real, if they can't see it, that's not your mirror to stand in front of. But let's go deeper. What really keeps us from showing up as ourselves? It's fear, the fear of rejection, the fear of being too vulnerable, too open, too real. And that fear, it's wired into us. It's ancestral. We were taught to fit in to survive. But guess what? Survival isn't the goal anymore. Thriving is. And thriving means standing up in your full truth, even when your voice shakes, even when love hasn't found you yet, even when the world tells you to tone it down. That's the moment you become magnetic. Because while everyone else is out there trying to impress, you're simply expressing. And there's nothing more irresistible than someone who doesn't need validation to know their worth. Now, here's where it gets uncomfortable. Ready? Most people don't reject you, they reject the mask you put on to please them. And every time you pretend, every time you dim your own light just to fit in their vision, you reinforce the belief that who you are isn't enough. That belief, it's a lie, but it's a sticky one. It clings to your thoughts, your choices, your energy. And until you rip it out at the root, you'll keep asking the same question. Why doesn't love find me? Love doesn't find masks. It finds people. Real ones, messy ones, glorious ones who've done the inner work to love themselves even when no one else claps. And speaking of clapping, let's not wait for applause. Let's talk about validation. You don't need someone to tell you you're beautiful, worthy, lovable. You need to say it to yourself so many times that the silence of others doesn't shake you. Because let's face it, sometimes the silence is louder than rejection. And yet, it's in that silence that your truest self begins to rise. Like a phoenix, yes, cliche, but stay with me, it doesn't rise quietly. It rises in flames. It burns away the pretending, the performing, the pleasing. And what's left? Confidence, not arrogance, not ego, just a grounded, powerful knowing that you don't have to chase what you can attract by just being you. Here's something they don't teach in self help books: people can sense energy before they hear your words. If your energy says, I hope I'm enough, they'll mirror back uncertainty. But if your energy says, I know who I am and I'm not afraid to show it, the world leans in. And yes, love does too. You see, confidence is silent. It doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't beg. It doesn't bargain. It simply walks into the room and makes space, not by demanding, but by belonging, not because it was invited, but because it decided to show up. So let me ask you something uncomfortable. Have you been showing up as yourself or as your survival self? You know what I mean, the version of you that learned to blend in, that tiptoes around love, hoping not to scare it away. But what if love is looking for you and walking right past you because it can't recognize you under all that pretending? What if the key isn't doing more, chasing harder, or fixing yourself, but finally being yourself? And here's the twist. Once you show up as your authentic self with full confidence, the need to attract, chase, or win anyone over dissolves. Because suddenly you're not operating from lack, you're radiating from wholeness. And wholeness isn't loud, but it is powerful. It speaks before you do. It fills the space with an undeniable presence that says, I don't need you to love me, I already do. But here's where things get even more interesting. Have you ever had a conversation where your soul felt seen, like the words being exchanged weren't just noise, but lifelines threading two hearts together in ways that silence couldn't explain? Now imagine if that level of connection wasn't random or rare, but something you could create intentionally. That's the power of meaningful communication. Not the surface level small talk or flirty back and forth we've been conditioned to accept as connection, but the kind of honest dialogue that dismantles walls, opens hearts, and builds bridges between two inner worlds. Here's the truth: people crave emotional intimacy more than physical closeness, but they settle for the latter because they don't know how to ask for the former. Let's be honest, most of us weren't taught how to communicate meaningfully. We were taught how to respond, how to impress, how to keep it light so we don't scare anyone away. And in doing so, we've become fluent in everything except emotional truth. We know how to talk, but we've forgotten how to connect. And that's not just unfortunate, it's dangerous. Because in a world filled with noise, if you don't know how to create depth, you become forgettable. And nothing stings more than realizing someone forgot you, not because you lacked beauty or worth, but because you never let them see the depths of who you are. Let me ask you a weird but real question. How many times have you said, I'm fine, when you were anything but? Yeah, we've all been there. We use autopilot answers because vulnerability feels risky. It's like showing someone your open wound and hoping they don't run away. But the irony, it's that very wound that builds the strongest emotional bond if you let someone in. Think about it. When was the last time you opened up and someone didn't flinch? That feeling of being accepted, flaws and all, becomes unforgettable. That's not weakness, that's connection, that's power. Now let's take a sharp turn because here's where it gets urgent. If you're not creating emotional connection, you're leaving the door wide open for disconnection. And disconnection doesn't always announce itself. It creeps in slowly. A gap in understanding, a misread tone, a missed opportunity to be real. And suddenly the closeness starts to fade and you don't even know why. But if you trace it back, it almost always comes down to one thing: communication that lacked intention, words that sounded nice but didn't mean anything, responses that checked boxes but didn't reveal truth. Let's zoom in on something powerful: listening. Not the kind where you nod while waiting for your turn to talk, but the kind where you listen so deeply that the other person feels safe in your silence. When you make someone feel heard, not just understood, something magical happens. They lean in, they soften, they trust. And trust isn't built in big moments, it's built in 1,000 small, consistent moments of presence. A raised eyebrow of curiosity, a pause that says, I'm with you, a follow up question that shows you are actually paying attention. That's not just conversation, that's emotional architecture. Ever notice how people remember how you made them feel, even if they forget your words? That's because emotional communication imprints on the nervous system. When someone feels emotionally safe with you, they associate your presence with peace, and peace is addictive, especially in a world that feels like chaos. Want to be unforgettable? Be the place someone feels emotionally grounded. Want to stand out? Speak the words that others are too afraid to say. Not for performance, not to impress, but because honesty has become rare and rarity creates value. Now, here's where it gets messy, but stay with me. Meaningful communication doesn't mean always saying the right thing. It means saying the real thing. Sometimes it's awkward. Sometimes it's raw. Sometimes it reveals parts of you you'd rather keep hidden. But in that moment, you're showing the one thing no one else can fake: your truth. And truth, when shared with courage, becomes magnetic. The right people don't run from your emotional honesty, they rise to meet it. And the ones who can't, well, aren't you glad you found out early? Let's throw in a reset for your attention. What if the secret to emotional connection isn't just what you say, but how you say it? Tone, timing, energy. The pauses between words that carry more meaning than the words themselves. The courage to say, I don't have the perfect words, but I need to say this anyway. That's real. That's human. And when we stop trying to perform emotional perfection, we finally start speaking in ways that matter. Let's talk urgency. If you don't start creating emotional connection now, you risk building relationships on performance instead of presence. And performance always demands more. You'll exhaust yourself trying to maintain a version of you that isn't sustainable. But when you speak from the heart, you don't have to keep up an act. You just have to keep showing up. Imperfect, honest, available. That version of you is far more compelling than any polished persona. There's a shift that happens when communication stops being about information and starts being about transformation. When your words don't just explain who you are, but invite someone to experience who you are. That's the level we're aiming for. Because the goal isn't just to be heard, it's to be felt. And when someone feels you, they don't just remember your words, they remember your presence. And presence? That's the most seductive force in the world. Presence says, I'm here. I'm not distracted. I'm not rehearsing my reply while you speak. I'm witnessing you. And when someone feels witnessed, they bloom. Suddenly, you're not just building a bond, you're creating a sacred space where connection can deepen without fear. That kind of communication isn't learned overnight, but it is learned. And the more you practice it, the more magnetic you become, not because you're performing, but because you're emotionally fluent in a world that's emotionally starved. Let's wrap this moment with a question that might just change the way you approach every conversation from now on. Ever been in a conversation where your eyes sparkled just from being seen, not for your appearance, not for what you could give, but for what made your heart beat a little faster, for the dreams you were chasing quietly behind the scenes? Now flip that. Imagine being the one who makes someone else feel that way, not by faking interest or offering empty compliments, but by stepping into their world with curiosity, enthusiasm, and genuine respect. That's not just connection, that's a magnetic force most people don't even realize they're capable of creating. And the truth is, if you want to deeply connect with someone, if you want your presence to stand out in a sea of surface level attention, then showing real interest in what drives them is non negotiable. Let's not sugarcoat it, most people don't really listen. They wait for their turn to talk. They nod politely, skim over the parts they don't understand, and quickly steer the conversation back to something more familiar. But when you pause and lean in, not just physically, but emotionally, you send a message louder than words. I see you, I value your fire, and I want to understand what lights you up. And that feeling, it's addictive. Because deep down, every single one of us is searching for someone who cares enough to care about what we care about. Here's where the fear creeps in. Many hold back from showing interest in someone's dreams because they're afraid of looking naive, overly eager, or worse, irrelevant. What if I don't get it? What if I ask a dumb question? But curiosity isn't weakness, it's courage. Asking someone about their passion is like knocking on the door to their soul. And if you're brave enough to open it, you won't just learn facts, you'll witness transformation. You'll see how their eyes light up when they talk about something that matters to them. You'll feel the shift in energy when they move from small talk to "this is who I am." And in that moment, you've created something sacred, emotional intimacy rooted in respect. But let's reset for a second. What if their passion is totally foreign to you? Maybe it's a career path you've never considered, a sport you can't pronounce, or an obsession with vintage watches that leaves you confused but intrigued. You don't have to get it, you just have to want to get it. There's power in the words, "Tell me more." Those three words can turn walls into windows. They show that you're not just there to pass time, you're there to see the world through their lens, even if just for a moment. Now here comes the urgency. If you overlook someone's passions, you're overlooking the core of who they are. People are their dreams, their goals, their vision for the future. If you skip that, you're not really connecting, you're observing from a distance. And distance never builds connection. It builds assumption, disinterest, and emotional drift. On the other hand, when you ask about someone's goals and genuinely want to know the why behind the what, you become a safe space. You become a witness to their becoming. And very few things in life feel more powerful than being supported while you rise. Let's talk about how this transforms the relationship dynamic. When you show interest in someone's purpose, you stop being a bystander in their journey, you become part of the narrative. You cheer them on, challenge them thoughtfully, and celebrate the small wins others don't even notice. You ask not just how their day went, but how their project is progressing, what's next in their big plan, or what obstacles they're overcoming. And suddenly, you're not just someone they talk to, you're someone they turn to. There's another layer to this. Most people overlook support doesn't always mean advice. Sometimes it means listening without interrupting. Sometimes it means getting excited when they're excited, even if you don't fully understand it. Sometimes it means showing up when they least expect it, just to say, "I believe in what you're building." You don't have to have all the answers. You just have to show up with presence, consistency, and heart. Let's throw in a curvy ball. What if their goals are bigger than yours right now? What if their drive makes you question your own? That's not a threat, it's an invitation. Watching someone chase something with passion should ignite your own fire, not dim your worth. Because being around ambition doesn't mean you're behind, it means you're close to greatness. And the closer you are to purpose driven people, the more you'll start to recognize your own potential waiting quietly in the background. And speaking of potential, do you know what it does to a person when they feel someone genuinely believes in them? It shifts everything. It unlocks courage they didn't know they had. It makes them want to show up stronger, better, more focused, not because they're trying to impress, but because they finally feel seen. That belief becomes fuel. And when you offer that kind of emotional investment, you become unforgettable, not because you demanded attention, but because you gave it in a way that most never do. Let's bring it down to earth with a quick gut check. How many times have you nodded along in a conversation only to forget what the other person said 2 minutes later? We've all done it. But if you want to be exceptional in love, you can't afford to be ordinary in how you listen. Ordinary listeners miss the details. Extraordinary listeners catch the moments that matter. The subtle shift in voice when someone talks about a dream. The way their energy changes when they speak about a setback. Those cues aren't random, they're roadmaps to connection. And here's where the real magic happens. The more you show interest in someone's passions, the more they begin to associate you with those passions. You become tied to the very things that matter most to them. You become the person who gets it, who remembers the small details, who notices the growth even when they don't. And that kind of presence, it's irreplaceable. It's what people crave when they say they want someone who understands them. Now take a breath, because here comes the twist you didn't see coming. Have you ever walked into a room and felt everyone's energy subtly shift, not because you said anything, but because there was something about your presence they couldn't quite define? That's not coincidence. That's the quiet power of mystery. The kind that doesn't scream for attention, but commands it anyway. And yet, in a world obsessed with oversharing, where people broadcast every thought, move, and emotion, mystery has become rare. and anything rare becomes valuable. Let that sink in, because when you blend mystery with genuine independence, you don't just attract, you captivate. You trigger curiosity, you create tension, you spark something ancient in the human psyche, the craving to explore what isn't fully known. Now pause for a second and ask yourself this. When was the last time you left a little silence in a conversation? Not because you were unsure, but because you didn't need to fill the air. Most people are uncomfortable with gaps. They rush to explain, to justify, to please. But mystery thrives in pauses, in not saying everything, in being so grounded in who you are that you don't feel the need to be fully understood in the first 5 minutes. And ironically, that restraint draws people in. Because what we can't easily figure out, we think about more. And what we think about more, we begin to feel connected to even if we don't know why. Here's where the fear creeps in. We're taught to believe that being open means being vulnerable, and that vulnerability is the fastest route to connection. And while emotional honesty is crucial, overexposure isn't the same as depth. Letting someone in doesn't mean handing over every detail of your life. True connection requires pacing. You have to leave space for wonder, for questions, for discovery. Because if someone feels like they already know everything, they'll stop looking. And once they stop looking, the intrigue fades. That's not rejection, that's predictability. And predictability kills attraction faster than any flaw ever could. Let's throw in a pattern interrupt. Ever watched a movie trailer that showed too much and thought, well, I don't even need to see the film now? That's what happens when you reveal everything too soon. You rob the moment of its depth. But when you reveal just enough to ignite curiosity, while holding space for someone to lean in and uncover more, you create tension, and tension, when done right, is electric. It's the space between what is known and what is yet to be discovered that creates magnetism. Now add independence into the mix and everything changes. Independence isn't just about doing things on your own. It's about having a life that feels full with or without anyone else in it. It's walking through the world with purpose, with hobbies you pursue passionately, goals that light you up, boundaries that you protect. That kind of energy doesn't ask for attention, it naturally attracts it. Because people gravitate toward those who know who they are, who don't need constant validation, who can stand alone but choose to connect. That choice makes every interaction more intentional, more sacred. Let's not pretend this doesn't challenge societal conditioning. For years, we've been fed the idea that closeness equals constant availability. That love means being everything, everywhere, all at once. But real connection doesn't need to be suffocating. It needs space to breathe. When you maintain your independence, you send a powerful signal. I'm not here to complete you. I'm here to complement you. And in doing so, you create balance. You become less of a role and more of a presence, unpredictable, exciting, and unshakably grounded. But here's the urgency: if you lose your mystery, if you give up your independence in the name of attachment, you become replaceable. Not because you're not valuable, but because you become accessible to the point of invisibility. When everything is shared, nothing feels special. When you're always available, your presence stops feeling like a privilege and starts feeling like background noise. And no one falls in love with background noise. This is where the transformation begins. Think about the times when you were most drawn to someone. Was it because they were always around, always available, always explaining? Or was it because something about them remained just out of reach, just enough to keep you wondering, to keep you showing up, to keep you engaged? That wasn't manipulation. That was natural intrigue. And it didn't happen because they tried harder, it happened because they didn't try to be anything other than themselves, fully present and slightly elusive. Let's zoom in even more. Independence creates boundaries, and boundaries create clarity. When you have your own passions, your own time, your own space, you force others to meet you on your level or walk away. And while that might feel risky, it's actually freedom. Because what stays, stays because it chooses to, not because it has to. That's the foundation of true desire. Desire thrives on choice, on anticipation, on knowing that someone could be anywhere else, but they keep showing up not out of obligation, but out of fascination. Let's take a breath and reset, because here comes a question you weren't expecting. What if the part of you that you've been hiding, holding back, or downplaying is exactly what makes you magnetic? What if your silence in some moments, your ability to walk away from drama, your refusal to explain yourself constantly isn't a flaw, but your edge? That edge is what carves space in someone's mind. That edge is what keeps them coming back, even when they can't explain why. Here's where it gets even more interesting. Mystery doesn't mean being cold or distant. It means being selective with what you share and when. It means being unpredictable in a way that feels exciting, not confusing. It means allowing someone to slowly peel back your layers, knowing that every reveal strengthens the bond. Because when you give someone something to earn, the value increases. When they have to pay attention to catch your truth, they'll start listening with more intention, and intentional listening is the beginning of emotional investment. So the next time you feel the urge to over explain, to prove your worth through constant closeness, pause. Ask yourself, am I sharing to connect or am I overexposing to be accepted? There's a difference. One creates depth, the other creates burnout. And the people who truly resonate with you, they don't need the whole map on day one, they want to go on the journey. They want to discover, explore, unlock. But they can only do that if there's something left to uncover. And just when you think they've seen it all, that's when you reveal a new layer.